Colman by Monica Furlong, Chapter 11. After her encounter with Uni, Juniper returned to Castle Door. Finbar arrived soon thereafter. King Mark's gold had stimulated the Irish blacksmiths and silversmiths to fine feats of workmanship. In the hold of his ship he had stored many shields, helmets, breastplates, swords, and daggers. As soon as his ship was sighted in the bay, Lion and the others sent out their smaller boats, loaded them with his cargo, and took the precious objects back to the cave of the mermaids. When Finbar returned to Castle Door, he was horrified that Juniper had let Wise Child run into danger, and with difficulty she restrained him from setting off to Caerleon at once to bring her home. Patiently she told him about the dreaming bundle, about Wise Child's determination to go, about Cormac's support of her, and about my belated decision to join them. And then, wondering if he would believe a word he heard, she told him about her meeting with Uni. Uni, he said somewhat scornfully. He had never forgiven her for the way she had once not given Juniper enough to eat and had subjected her to cold, discomfort, and worse. "She's the one," said Juniper. "Never mind what you think of her. She's the one who is going to help us to save Castle Door." Juniper then told Finbar about Uni's instructions to her to go to Caerleon in disguise, and her worries about it. It did not occur to her to not obey her old teacher, but she was hard put to think of a disguise that would not betray her immediately to her Aunt Marut. The very idea of a disguise was painful to her. She was accustomed to being herself. "Treat it as a game," said Finbar. "Pretend that it is going to be fun, a chance to wear fancy dress." "I don't think it would work if I went as a guest," Juniper replied thoughtfully. "They've probably counted the guests, or else will want to know who they are. I could go as an entertainer, a singer or storyteller, perhaps." "What do you feel about going back to Caerleon?" Finbar asked her curiously. "Marut frightens me less than the Grey Knight," Juniper replied. "But yes, Caerleon itself frightens me. I would not go there for anyone less than Uni or Wise Child." "Who should never have been allowed to go there," put in Finbar. It is not so easy to stay a Doran who has made up her mind," said Juniper. "She is too young to be a Doran or anything else." "The Dorans say that one is a Doran from one's cradle," Juniper answered. "Sooner or later you have to recognize it, then train the natural skills that you have and be willing to become a Doran. There is no doubt now that Wise Child is willing." "When will you distribute the weapons to the villagers?" she asked. "Not until absolutely necessary. It is too dangerous. When their original weapons were taken from them, one man, Ruan, kept his and hid them. A week later Perquin ordered a search of all the houses to make sure everyone had obeyed. Ruan's weapons were discovered. They tied him to a tree and impaled him with his own sword." Juniper, who could remember Ruan from her childhood, looked stricken. "I didn't know that. In that case, I'm amazed that anyone is prepared to take up weapons again." "And I am amazed that no one has betrayed us to Perquin," Finbar said. "They are good people here," said Juniper. "But they mustn't be asked to run unnecessary risks. So long as the Cave of the Mermaids is unknown to Perquin, it is a safe place. When the time comes, all the men can go there, and arm, and set off together as the army of Castle Door." What chance will they stand against the Grey Knight's men? Finbar looked mysterious. It looks as if we shall not be alone. You are hiring mercenaries, you mean? No need for that. It turns out that we have allies. Who? Juniper asked in surprise. Castle Dor is not the only kingdom to suffer under the Grey Knight's oppression. The people of the Northland have also had their harvests stolen and their people persecuted. They are just as angry as the people here. So there will be 2 armies, even if they are rather small. Maybe more. The Northlanders are trying to find other friends, and it is easier than you might think because people fear that sooner or later the Grey Knight will turn on them. So we shall have many men, I think, and we shall plan to take the castle by surprise. The only question is when. I have been meaning to tell you, Juniper said, that Brangwyn has asked that Urk, the harpist, should go to the castle to play at his birthday celebration. A messenger came from Marut inviting him, and we have told him that he must, of course, go. Urk may be able to get a message back to us. Urk is blind, said Finbar. And brave as a lion, Juniper said. Because he is blind, he is insisting on companions to go with him. Bryken's sons, twin boys called Levin and Necton, 15 years old, have volunteered. Then one of them can come back with information. Finbar brooded over the news that Brangwyn had asked specially for a harpist from Castle Dor. Do you think it was an act of rebellion against Marut? He said. It certainly suggests that he has not forgotten Castle Dor. And the people have not forgotten him, said Juniper. He is their sign of hope. They are prepared to risk danger for him and for Castle Dor, as Wise Child is. Finbar would have been more worried than he was if he had known the frightful situation in which Wise Child and I now found ourselves. Because of cold and discomfort, I barely slept on that first night in the prison, but when I did at last fall into a troubled sleep, I was awakened by a disturbing sound. I soon knew what it was. Wise Child was very quietly crying. I don't know about anyone else, but I often hate people to know that I am crying. For this reason, I could not decide at first whether to let her know that I knew. But then a louder sob escaped her, and I could not bear it. I reached out and took her hand. We will get through this, I told her reassuringly. I think Marut will kill us, after torturing us, said Wise Child, and then her tears could be contained no longer. I am cold and hungry and frightened, she said, her words ending in another sob. Listen, I said, trying to sound more cheerful than I felt. We have Uni on our side, and we have the protections, which must count for something. Somewhere around the castle is Cormac, who will help us if he can. All that apart, we have each other, and we are totally on each other's side. Rack my brains as I might, I could not think of anything else to say. All the same, Wise Child cheered up a bit, as you often do when you have spoken about the things that frighten you most, even though none of them have changed. I know, she said. It could be worse. The light of morning was filtering into our horrible prison, revealing puddles on the floor and the cheerless walls of gray stone. I wonder what Prince Brangwyn thinks has become of us, I went on. I wonder if he has mentioned us to Cormac. A little later we could hear the sounds of the soldiers' boots on the stairs, and we knew that they were coming for us. We squeezed hands, but by now we were quite calm. They pushed and hustled us, quite unnecessarily, since we were not resisting, and we climbed the innumerable steps to Marut's workroom. This time she was seated in a large carved chair with Uni standing beside her. The flask of purple liquid set next to them on a table. The soldiers half threw us into the room, and we stood in front of Marut. She looked paler than ever, and as if her eyes were sunken into her head. "You can leave us," she said to the men. My eyes were drawn to a brazier on one side of the room with a fierce fire burning in it. My knees started to shake. Surely Marut would not. But I knew very well that there was nothing Marut would not do if it suited her. "So," said Marut in a rather faint voice, "you have tasted the hospitality of my dungeons. I trust it was to your liking?" We said nothing. "Of course, I could just leave you both there to rot, but I must confess that I am curious about you. You come here posing as two innocent children in search of work, and then I find that you are dabbling in magic. It is bad luck for you that I know something of magic. So perhaps you would care to tell me what sort of magic you were thinking of practicing here, and why." Neither of us could think of anything to say. "Cat got your tongue? Oh, I think, don't you, Juliet, that we could persuade them to say a little more than that?" Uni was silent. I thought that she looked strained and tired, something I never remembered noticing in her before. Marut got up slowly and awkwardly from her chair. Then, walking across the room, she picked up a long metal rod that was leaning against the wall. She thrust it into the heart of the brazier, where almost at once it became rosy red, then white hot. "Fire," said Marut thoughtfully. "It never fails to make people speak." Wise Child and I watched the rod become hotter and hotter, as if hypnotized. "Or should we see what another day of hunger and thirst might achieve?" asked Marut. "Juliet, what do you think?" "I have an idea that I would like to put to my lady in private," Uni replied. "Very well," said Marut, surprised, "but it had better be a good one." We were bundled outside to wait on this conversation. We heard their voices rising and falling for a while, and then Marut summoned us again. "This afternoon," she said, "I wish you to go and amuse Prince Brangwyn as usual. In the meantime, you can return to your cell." It was only after we had got away from that horrible room that we fully understood how terrified we had been. My legs began to shake so much that I could barely walk downstairs, and even when we were back in the cell, we did not speak for some minutes. "What is going on?" said Wise Child after a while. "I don't understand it." "Marut is certainly not concerned for us," I replied. "It must be about trying to learn something of Prince Brangwyn's feelings. I bet she is going to plant someone in the room to eavesdrop." "Put someone behind the tapestry, you mean? How horrible! To use us to lead the poor prince into trouble." I nodded. "And we won't be able to warn him, or they will overhear." We sat shivering in the cold cell until once again we were summoned, not by Uni, as we had half hoped, but by the soldiers. Dirty and disheveled from our night in the cell, we were ushered into Prince Brangwyn's presence, where a surprise waited for us. Cormac stood beside the prince's chair. The prince looked at our dirty, crumpled clothes in astonishment. We had never before presented ourselves to him in this condition. Also, something of the fear and distress we had endured must have shown on our faces. His habitual politeness fortunately took over, and he did not ask questions. But I felt his glance upon us more than once, and noted the slight frown on his face, as if he was working out the significance of it. With his natural courtesy, he offered us cakes and wine, which we gratefully accepted, and since we were both desperately hungry, we made short work of them. I felt that the prince was observing this, too. I could tell that Cormac was puzzling over our appearance, looking at us with that special quality of concern that was all his own. "Is everything all right?" the prince asked gently. "Yes, yes," said Wise Child, almost impatiently. She was glancing around the room to see where a potential eavesdropper might be hidden. I had already noticed a slight movement of the tapestry, which might have been a draught, but equally might have been a hidden eavesdropper. Cormac's presence was an advantage. I did not think that the prince would speak very frankly in front of him, even though he knew him to be a friend of ours. It soon appeared, however, that he had merely obeyed a request from the prince to discuss some detail of Golden's care, some medicine the horse needed. The prince trusted Cormac more than he trusted Marut's grooms, and at that moment at any moment he might leave. I tried desperately to think of a way to keep him there. In the meantime, however, Wise Child, often quicker than me, had thought of a way of warning Brangwyn. The prince's poetry slate lay on a side table. Wise Child picked it up, as if curious about it, and, to the prince's astonishment and perhaps even anger, began to write, "Take care, eavesdropper." "There," she said to the prince, "I have found a rhyme for your poem." And she held out the slate to him. A change came over his face as he read, but with his usual self-mastery, he said at once, "That's a better rhyme than I had thought of. It is you that should be the poet." Wise Child took a piece of cloth and rubbed out the words she had written. "It was just a passing thought," she said. My fear was that the prince would be so angry at the thought of an intruder that he would at once pull back the tapestries to reveal him. But with his usual admirable self-control, he did nothing. Having dismissed Cormac, he began to talk casually to us about Golden, and then he asked Wise Child for a game of chess. "Play my lute, if you wish," he said politely to me. He knew that I enjoyed picking out tunes and could do it rather well. In that warm, comfortable room, where everything appeared safe, it was difficult to believe in our damp prison. It felt like another world. And yet there seemed no hope of not having to return to it, and to the worse horrors of Marut's workroom. I longed to be able to tell the prince what had happened to us. I thought miserably that this might be the last good time we would ever know. The game of chess seemed to move remarkably slowly. Wise Child, usually a rather impulsive player, deliberated for long periods over her moves. She told me later that she was brooding on whether there was anything she could do, and the prince started to doodle on his slate. I positioned myself between him and the tapestry as I played the lute. We did not know whether the eavesdropper could see as well as hear. The prince showed Wise Child the words he had written. "What is wrong?" Hidden by my presence, and trying not to let the slate squeak, Wise Child wrote, "M is keeping us in prison." The prince picked up the cloth Wise Child had used and casually obliterated her words. "Not a bad idea," he said. Then he went on, "We shan't finish this game today, Wise Child. Come back tomorrow and I shall beat you hollow." "No chance," said Wise Child, but she looked more cheerful. If we did not return tomorrow, the prince would have reason to ask why. The afternoon wore away until one of the soldiers came for us, and we were escorted back to the deadly cold of the cell. With one accord we lay down on our pallets and covered ourselves with our meager blankets. There seemed nothing to say except, "You know, I am sure someone was hiding behind the tapestry. It moved several times. Once I thought I could hear breathing." Both of us knew very well that late that night we would find ourselves back in Marut's room, and we lay there waiting for the dread summons. I dozed off once or twice. I think it was a response to the sheer terror of our situation. Although Wise Child had saved the prince, it seemed as if nothing could save us. The summons came. On legs from which all the strength seemed to have drained, we climbed the stairs. The room was much as it had been the night before, with the metal rod heating in the brazier, and the flask of purple liquid laid out on the table as if in accusation. Marut's face seemed more sunken than it did the night before, her pale eyes uncanny against her ashen skin. Her hand on her snake stick trembled, I noticed. Once again Uni, looking very grave, stood beside her. "You," she said sharply, pointing her stick at Wise Child, "step forward." Wise Child did so, slowly, reluctantly. "So tell me about your practice of magic. What do you actually do?" "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do. No one who does not practice magic has a flask in their cupboard like that one." "I told you." I could hear the tremble in Wise Child's voice. "I was looking after it for a friend." "What friend? Someone in this house?" "No, someone I knew before I came here." "Lies," said Marut fiercely. "All lies. So I am going to have to work for a confession then, am I?" I could see that Wise Child held her hand to her breast, where the silver moon must be, and I wondered if it was growing hot, as it did when danger threatened. If it was going to protect her, then now was the moment. "Juliet," snapped Marut, "come here and hold the child." Marut stood up with great difficulty and moved to the brazier, where, using a cloth, she took hold of the metal rod by the end and thrust it farther into the heart of the fire. She seemed strangely excited. I could see that her hands were trembling, and her face, so pale a few moments before, was flushed. Suddenly she let go of the metal rod and stumbled for a moment. "My lady," said Uni in apparent concern, "sit down for a moment, and then you can give the child what she deserves." Uni helped Marut back to the carved chair, where she sat shaking, her hand over her face. "I will get you a little wine, my lady," Uni said. "That will make you feel better." Uni moved into the shadows of Marut's workroom, taking the purple flask with her. She returned with a goblet full of wine, but without the flask. She carried the goblet to Marut, who drank the wine down in quick gulps. "There, my lady, that will make you feel better." Marut's eyes rolled for a moment, and then suddenly she became quite still, her eyes closed, her body rigid in her chair. "That will last for several hours," Uni told us, during which time she will see and hear nothing. Won't she suspect you when she wakes up? Wise Child asked. No, she won't remember anything about it. I will tell her that she fainted, and that I sent you both back to your cell. As she spoke, Uni retrieved the now empty flask and began to fill it with wine from one of Marut's bottles. The liquid was not quite the same color, but I thought it was probably close enough to convince someone who had not just seen what had happened. Please help us, Uni, said Wise Child. We are terrified of what Marut will do to us. For heaven's sake, said Uni, as if Wise Child were being utterly unreasonable. You have just seen what the protections can do for you. Now concentrate, and I will tell you what will happen next. Soon I will ask the soldiers to take you back to your cell. They will lock you in, and therefore be able to confirm to Marut that they did so. Later, while it is still dark, Cormac will come and release you and take you to his room, where he will hide you until the day of the feast. Uni put her hand in among her many garments, felt in some inner pocket, and produced a key, which she handed to me. Keep it where it cannot be seen, she said unnecessarily. Won't Marut suspect you when she knows we've escaped? Wise Child asked. Possibly, but probably not. She does not know that I have a key to the prison.